if Carson Wentz was mediocre last year, right? Like if he was a league average quarterback, the conversation's different. Maybe the people in the building right now are different. Quarterback play can obscure a lot of the problems. And when the quarterback does not play at that level, and the regression from Carson Wentz was real, and it was tough for the Eagles to handle, and clearly it got to a point where both sides were looking for something different. But when the quarterback plays like that and you don't have the other pieces around, that's what happens. So it's the shame in it is that they won the Super Bowl with a second-year coach. They had a 25-year-old franchise quarterback, and they had flexibility in the future years. I don't think anyone in the building foresaw a situation where we would be talking here and they wouldn't have the quarterback and they wouldn't have the coach and they would be picking in the top 10.
Welcome back to Birds 365, edition 4, as we get this new Eagles talk stream underway. Yes, at some point they're actually going to start playing games, but we're enjoying the offseason. We've got actual news to talk today about a couple of Eagle moves, which is added to the conversation, and we're going to add to it even more because we're going to bring in a third voice. Better yet, a third talking head. Better yet, a head that actually has some hair on it. We had Lane Johnson earlier. Unfortunately, he, like McDonald and McMullen, follically challenged. Not the case with the next guy to join the show. Outstanding beat reporter for the Eagles for The Athletic. Zach Berman joins us here on Birds 365. How much product do you have in the hair today, Zach Berman?
I have no product, but I wish I can pull off those hats. I can't quite do that.
You can do anything, Zach.
Well, congratulations on the show, by the way.
Thank you, Zach. Obviously big news, not big news, but significant news for the Eagles yesterday, signing Eric Wilson, who was a 3-down linebacker for the Vikings after Anthony Barr got injured last season. I think a lot of people put that connection together early in the process because of Jonathan Gannon's history with Mike Zimmer, plus Nick Rollis was the assistant linebacker coach in Minnesota. How do you think that fits in for the Eagles and a shift at linebacker? I think they're going to put more value in that position.
Yeah, I think it was a good signing. Frankly, if they made this signing the first week of free agency, I would have said it was a sensible move. I thought at the time he was going to require more years and more money. To get him on a 1-year deal at the figure they got him at, it represents good value. There's a clear need there. I understand there can be a degree of skepticism given the Eagles' ill-fated recent history signing free agent linebackers. I frankly think this move is closer to Nigel Bradham in 2016 than, say, Corey Nelson in 2018. The reason I say that is because he has starting experience, like John mentioned. He also has that familiarity with the scheme, like John mentioned, and that's comparable to Nigel Bradham coming in the Jim Schwartz's scheme. So I think this is a player who's going to step in and be the number one linebacker. And he was, my colleague Sheil Kapadia, who ranks 150 unrestricted free agents, had Wilson number 83 overall, had him as the 5th off-ball linebacker. So I think it was a good move for the Eagles.
John and I talked about this in hour number 1, Zach, because I won't say shocked, but pretty damn surprised the Eagles were able to get him on a 1-year contract under $3.5 million. Most people were projecting, as you said, multi-year and a higher base salary than what he's going to make this year. So I said, what did I miss? I don't watch the Vikings week in and week out. I don't have game film on Wilson and then what he did or didn't do for the Vikings. The numbers say, damn, this guy can play. Passes intercepted, forced fumbles, sacks for loss, INTs. The numbers are great, 122 tackles. There's got to be something that says he's got to only settle for a 1-year deal. And John told me he's not great at stopping the run. He's not a guy who's going to come up into the hole one-on-one, be able to take a ball carrier down. He doesn't necessarily shed blocks when offensive linemen get to the second level. But the Eagles have a better defensive line than the Vikings did last year. I think he's got a chance to be better here than he was in Minnesota. Do you?
Yeah, first off, that's fair. You know that the market tells you something, right? When a player lingers and this is what they signed for, that's the league telling you that. I also think it's the nature of free agency this year. This is something I think the Eagles anticipated, that the top free agents were going to get paid, and then maybe that middle tier, that middle class, will be signing 1-year deals to try to get back in the market next year when there's more money to go around. So I think it was a product of that. As far as him being better in this Eagles defense, it's hard to say because I do think there's still some ambiguity about what this defense will look like. I agree he'll have a better defensive line in front of him than what he had in Minnesota last year when they were really ravaged by injuries and opt-outs. That being said, he's on the right track. He's an emerging player. Last year was his first year as a full-time starter, and the opportunity is present. But he has to do it, and we'll see how he looks on the field.
You know, Zach, I brought up Nick Rawless, who is the Eagles' new linebackers coach. I think he's 27, the same age as Alex Singleton. That's been a storyline throughout the offseason. The entire coaching staff is very young, not a lot of experience at certain positions. We don't know a lot about Nick Ciriani right now, except he's got a lot of energy and the limited time. But you kind of dove deeper into his background, talked to his family. What do you get a sense of what we're getting with Nick Sirianni?
I think you're getting obviously an energetic coach, a passionate coach. I think that's something that the Eagles particularly valued. You know, I've spoken to the people who played for him when he was an assistant coach at IUP. So, you know, you're talking about D3, small colleges. A player tore his ACL, and Nick Sirianni had him stay in his house with him, picked him up at the hospital. And you heard Jeffrey Lurie talk about that, and it can be, I should say, you heard Jeffrey Lurie talk about how much he cares about his players and the relationship with his players, and that can be somewhat hokey, but I think in Sirianni's case, that is something that they particularly valued, that relationship with the players. And like John mentioned, in terms of the age of the coaching staff, that was intentional for the Eagles. I do think they looked at this model around the league of what you're seeing in Los Angeles with Sean McVay, San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan, Green Bay with Matt LaFleur. You're seeing some of these younger coaches and some of these younger coaching staffs and the benefits to that. So that is intentional, and I think that's what the Eagles are getting. Someone fresh, someone young, someone energetic, but he is going to have to grow on the job here.
Zach, the Eagles at this stage during the offseason, coming in, during the offseason, free agency is to fill holes. Some of that is depth. You're just going to try and round out your roster, make sure if and when you do have injuries, you have guys who aren't necessarily starters, part-time players who you can ask to play a bigger role. You try and have as few actual starting holes that you want to fill. The Eagles had a couple this offseason. I think they filled one at the safety position. I think they filled one at linebacker yesterday. There's certainly an argument to be made that they need to fill a starting quarterback position.
Absolutely.
You can do it with your first round pick. You might not get the exact player you want. You might only get the third or fourth best when you're picking where the Eagles are picking, depending on if there's a run in the draft. They have not been able to make a cornerback signing of significance this offseason. How are they going to fill it? Are they just going to believe that Avonte Maddox is going to be able to play outside again? Are they going to make a trade? Is it a foregone conclusion that their first-round draft pick is going to be a cornerback? I still see a glaring need on this team for upgraded cornerback. How's it going to get filled?
The draft in particular, they'll draft, in my opinion, more than one corner, right? So that's a clear area. And in first round, when you go down from 6 to 12, you're really in a sweet spot in terms of corners. Not to say they're definitely going to take one in the first round, but I would be surprised if a cornerback is not picked in the first 2 rounds by the Eagles. And then thereafter, I think they're going to be opportunistic when it comes to acquiring the players. I don't think they're focused right now on having this depth chart complete on April 8th or even on April 30th, right? I look back to 2017 when this time of the year I was asking Howie Roseman about running back. I was asking Howie Roseman about cornerback, and they didn't address either of those holes really during free agency. They in the draft, the running back market didn't work the way they wanted. They go out, they sign LeGarrette Blount a month later. Cornerback, that stretched all the way into training camp when they traded for Ronald Darby. So I think the way they're looking at it is that the team building, particularly at this transition period that they're in, is more, throughout the entire offseason as opposed to trying to fill these holes in March.
And by the way, you mentioned 2017. I want to, Zach wrote his book, Underdogs, and it is the spring, and Mother's Day is coming up, Father's Day is coming up, birthdays. So anybody who has an Eagles fan, I recommend that book. It's the best look at the Eagles Super Bowl season. And I want to bring that up, Zach, because you mentioned.
By the way, is that book behind him? Can he?
It is.
I'm going to take a wild guess and say it's readily handy for us.
Yes.
Oh, very good.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And you buy it at Amazon, wherever you get your books. Yeah. But Zach, obviously 2017, and I think we have to talk about it. We got to go back because we have you with Carson Wentz. How did we get here? 3 calendar years off a Super Bowl 52 championship, and the head coach is gone, and the franchise quarterback is gone. I know we could do a 8-hour show on just that, but 1 or 2 bullet points of how you think we got here.
John, similar to you, I've asked that question to so many people, and I haven't really heard a definitive answer yet, right? I think there's, frankly, a lot of disbelief around the league about how they got here. There's a few things I would look at. First off, they did not build their roster well in the subsequent years, and they would tell you that it's because of the strategy. They were trying to sneak more into that window. I don't think it was the strategy. I think it was the execution. I think they've had the picks, right? They've had the money to spend. They just haven't done it as well. And when you miss on draft picks and you miss on free agent signings, it's hard to cover that up. And I think that's how the roster got older and untalented, right? There were some short-term trades that they made, but I don't think that's what hurt them as much as missing on some of those first and second round picks, or at least not getting the returns that they needed on those first and second round picks. And then the other thing is that if Carson Wentz was mediocre last year, right? Like if he was a league average quarterback, the conversation's different. Maybe the people in the building right now are different. Quarterback play can obscure a lot of the problems. And when the quarterback does not play at that level, and the regression from Carson Wentz was real, and it was tough for the Eagles to handle, and clearly it got to a point where both sides were looking for something different. But when the quarterback plays like that and you don't have the other pieces around, that's what happens. So it's the shame in it is that they won the Super Bowl with a second-year coach. They had a 25-year-old franchise quarterback, and they had flexibility in the future years. I don't think anyone in the building foresaw a situation where we would be talking here, and they wouldn't have the quarterback, and they wouldn't have the coach, and they would be picking in the top 10, or with the pick earned in the top 10, I should say.
Zach, we know part of your job, our jobs, anyone who follows the Eagles, even our listeners and streamers and the like, they all like to play along with the general manager and second-guess moves and the like. We haven't talked to you here on the show, certainly been reading all your coverage of the Eagles leading up to the draft, dropping down from number 6 to number 12. Get the concept, get future draft picks in exchange for it. I understand the thinking behind it, but then you come back to the reality. The player that you get at 12 is not going to be as good as the player that's taken at 6, or at least in theory, that's the case. But then it'll play itself out over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. People will start second guessing on draft day. How could they do this? They've already lost out. Well, we need it to play out. Who's going to be the guy that is picked at number 6 and or 7 and or still on the board when the Eagles could have made the selection that people are going to complain about most, that the Eagles had the chance to take this guy and passed on it when they traded down? Who's the one that's going to cause most of the stir here in Philadelphia?
Good question. If Jamar Chase is there at 6, I think that's the player. I personally think Kyle Pitts is a special talent and a local guy, a Philadelphia guy. It would have been a fun story for us to talk about. Now, there's some question there about the value of a top 10, of the value of a tight end in the top 10. But I think that if you said to me who in this draft has the best chance of being a Hall of Fame player, one of the elite players at his position, then I would say Kyle Pitts is that player. And so there's a chance that the Eagles won't have the opportunity to draft a player who has that upside. Now, that being said, I can't knock the Eagles too much, because I try to say, if I was in Howie Roseman's position, what would I do? And I would have taken this trade. I would have gotten the extra first-round pick, given the stage of where they are in the roster building process, in figuring out who their quarterback is. Having that optionality is particularly important. But you are absolutely right, Jody. What the Eagles lack the most right now is blue chip talent, and your chance of hitting on a blue chip player is it's much better at number 6 than at number 12.
Yeah, Zach, I keep coming back to value when it comes to the Eagles, and I've mentioned to Jody in the past, I really go back to Andy Reid in 1999, because I think that's where the modern generation of the Philadelphia Eagles sort of got their foundation, and the fact that Andy believed the old quote, give me 2 tackles, 2 defensive ends, a quarterback, 2 cornerbacks, and I'll figure out the rest. And then I look at the history from 99 forward. Anytime this team's been in the top half of the draft, forget about top 10, top half, 16 or above, it's been quarterback, offensive line, defensive line. Does that change, or do they default? And is that the reason Howie came back, along with the optionality? Obviously, in case you want to get a quarterback next year, are we looking at a quiddy pay? And how upset would this fan base be if Kyle Pitts, the Archbishop Wood kid, goes to the Dallas Cowboys?
Well, you're absolutely right about this team building philosophy, and that hasn't changed, right? And you are right too that if you're picking at 6, unless you like Sewell or Rashawn Slater and you're going offensive line, there wasn't that pass rusher who you're going to take it at number 6. And I don't think that they were in a spot for a quarterback there either. So if you're looking at that team building philosophy, it probably wasn't going to work there at 6, and it makes more sense at 12. So I can absolutely see them going pass rusher. And frankly speaking, that's a long-term need here. Brandon Graham is getting older. As we know, Derek Barnett and Josh Sweat are both entering the final years of their contracts. I imagine one will be back beyond 2021. But it is something you need to look at long term, and an outstanding pass rusher is definitely worth that type of pick. But you can't force it because of the position, and it's an odd year in the draft this year where the top of the draft is so saturated with offensive players and in particular skilled players, and you just don't have the top level defensive players that you had in the past, right? If we were on this show 2 years ago, I would say the Eagles would have their pick of defensive linemen at number 12. That was such a deep defensive line class. It's not the case this year, and so you really need to have conviction in the player. As far as Kyle Pitts going to Dallas, that would be a really difficult scenario for the Eagles if for the next decade or so, Eagles fans are watching CeeDee Lamb and Kyle Pitts back-to-back first-round picks in that offense.
If that's the case, and you get down to the pick before the Cowboys are ready to hand in their card, does Howie Roseman do it about face and try and trade back up? You assume that a guy like Pitts is going to be off the board before 10 and 11, where the division rivals Cowboys and Giants both pick. Is there any chance the Eagles get aggressive after moving backwards, actually move back up on draft day in the first round?
It's hard for me to say specifically with Pitts because I'll be honest, I don't know their evaluation of him, and I've spoken to smart people who really question the value of a tight end that high. They look at the history of tight ends that high, and also they say, look at the Eagles roster. If there's one position where they have a guy who you can build around, it's at tight end. That being said, my personal opinion is that given where the Eagles are, they cannot even consider their depth chart when they make this pick. If a tight, you don't pass on a guy if you think he can be a top of the league player because Dallas Goedert's on your roster. You don't pass on if there's a left tackle who you think could be a franchise left tackle. You don't pass because Jordan Mailata showed promise, Andre Dillard showed promise. Your North Star, if you will, here is who has the chance to be a top of the league player and take him. I think Kyle Pitts can be that player, but I'm not paid to make those decisions.
All right, let me follow that up. I don't think this is going to happen. If it does, I'll scream bloody murder because I'm such a huge fan of the player. There's a possibility that Justin Fields could fall all the way to number 12. I think it's highly unlikely. You want me to put a percentage point on it? 0.5%, less than 1, but it's not a 0. If he were to fall down, is that a guy that you would go, yeah, we are going to stay to our board, take the best available player, not be depth chart specific, or is there absolutely zero chance they take a quarterback in the first round? What'll happen if Justin Fields comes all the way down to number 12?
Well, if it was me, I would run that card in, right? Like, because I think very highly of Justin Fields, which what he did against Clemson this year. A few people do that. That being said, I think if the Eagles were intrigued enough with the quarterback class here, or with the possibility they could land one, they would have tried to trade up from 6 as opposed to down from 6, right? I think either their evaluation was these quarterbacks are going 1, 2, 3, 4, which I still think is going to happen, by the way. And frankly speaking, it might not be shocking if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? If a team tries to trade up with Cincinnati, but either they thought the quarterbacks were going top 4, or they didn't like the quarterbacks beyond the top 2 guys. So I can't tell you right now which one it is, but I think if the Eagles were in the quarterback market, they would have stayed at 6 or they would have traded up. They wouldn't have traded down. If the scenario outlines there and it's something happens where Field slips, then you absolutely must be opportunistic. But it really all depends on your evaluation of the player. And trust me when I say this, the way I think of players has been a lot different than the way they think of players over the past few years sometimes.
Zach, you mentioned running up with that card, and I want to tie that into the coaching staff and go back to that because it's a new group. I think one of the legitimate criticisms you could have of Doug Peterson's staff over the past couple of seasons is the lack of player development. I do think that too many fans say you hand that card in and you get a good player or a bad player. At what point do we have to look at the assets that this team has put into the receiver position? Jalen Reagor, first-round pick. And by the way, two more picks at wide receiver. Quez Watkins, John Hightower later in the draft. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, second round in 2019. At what point does this team say, we have to develop what we have because we have other holes? I know everybody wants playmakers, but do they got to get these guys ramped up more than thinking about adding other bodies to that wide receiver room?
It's a great point. And the way I'll answer the question is this. Last year in the free agent market, Nelson Aguilar and Ronald Darby had to sign 1-year low-cost show-me deals after playing for the Eagles. Now, I know they were coming off injuries and whatnot, but that was tied to performance as well. This year, after playing elsewhere, both players got paid significantly. So the way you look at that is what was happening. And by the way, those are both significant positions of need for the Eagles. They would be very well suited to have a mid-20s wide receiver and mid-20s cornerback right now worth that type of money. So were they not developed well in Philadelphia, or were they not used well in Philadelphia, or both? And this is a question that the Eagles really must ask themselves, because when you have players in the building at positions of need who are playing better elsewhere than in your system, that's a problem. So I think maybe the Eagles would say their evaluation of the player was right. The way they were used wasn't correct. Obviously, football's not baseball where a third baseman for the Yankees can play third base for the Phillies, and it's apples for apples. The schemes are different, the systems are different. That being said, I do think it's a legitimate concern that John brought up, and it's something the Eagles must be honest with themselves about.
Zach, if I put this question to my partner, Johnny Mack, I know what his answer would be. He's kind of already tipped his hand there, but I need your answer. The thing that you will remember the Nate Sudfeld era most for is what?
I mean, I would say being the backup quarterback in the Super Bowl, right? That he was a chin strap away from playing against Tom Brady in the Super Bowl. Now, I understand that Week 17 game this year. Frankly speaking, I think of that Week 17 game in 2017 when they sat Foles because we saw him during an extended period. But when I think of Sudfeld, I think of the fact that the Eagles were willing to go into a Super Bowl with this guy as their backup. That at the time, that was a big story, right? When Carson goes down, it was, are you going to sign someone to back up Nick in case Nick goes down? And the fact that they didn't do it. So I covered Sudfeld's entire time here, and I think about the fact that they went into the Super Bowl with him as the backup.
See, you're way too nice a guy. Yeah. Berman, you're way too nice a guy. I'm sorry. It's about Week 17 last year, and it was part of the decision. I'm not going to say the number one thing, but it had to be part of the decision as to why Doug Peterson's no longer here. So Doug Peterson getting fired because of Nate Sudfeld's contribution certainly outweighs he sat on the bench.
You see, Jody, that's where I disagree with you. I don't think Doug Peterson was making that decision. No. I don't think Doug Peterson was doing that unilaterally, right? Like, I think
Doug lied to us when Doug said it was my decision and my decision alone. He looked right in the camera. He looked right in your eyes and lied to you, Berman.
I think Doug. I think Doug took a lot of swords when he or fell on a lot of swords when he was.
He did. That's part of the job in Philadelphia, Jody. I thought he wanted you to go unstoppable, which Jeffrey Lurie told him.
That's where McCullough would have gone. I know so.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, Nate. People joke about it. He was a great locker room guy when we were in the locker room, Zach. He had a tremendous relationship with Carson Wentz and Nick Foles. Mm-hmm. That chemistry of that 2017 group was phenomenal. It was off the charts. How big an impact, again, go back to your book, Underdogs, how big of an impact does that locker room culture have on successful teams?
It's absolutely significant. That being said, it's like the chicken and the egg argument, right? Like, do you have a good team because the culture is good, or do you have a good culture because you have a good team? And I don't know what the answer is there. Because clearly they found the right mix of players that year. They had a group of like highly motivated players at certain points in their career, and it just all worked well together. But I do think that the Eagles kind of thought they found a secret sauce, and it clearly wasn't the case, right? So yeah, the locker room chemistry is significant. It's obviously something that teams must factor in, but I think oftentimes winning is what creates that more than the locker room creates the winning.
Zach, last one for me, and I'm kind of split on this because as a member of the media, I love when guys like yourself and Johnny Mack and guys who cover the team unearth conversations and speculate and project things to happen before they actually happen. As a former general manager's son, I like when teams keep their information to themselves and stuff doesn't get out. I had not heard speculation on the Wilson signing or the re-signing of Howard. And kudos to the Eagles for doing that. We've still got 2 more weeks before the draft. Is there a signing of significance? Is there a free agent move to be made now between now and the draft? Or is it just going to say we've got 11 picks, we're going to move them, we're going to shake them, we're going to come away with X amount of players? Our next major roster step is going to be with the draft. Which one more likely?
I think similar to the Wilson signing, they're going to be opportunistic, right? If they can get a cornerback at the right price, they will pounce on it. I think it really depends what the price is. I think for a lot of these free agents, they're going to wait to see how the draft shakes because there are going to be teams, like I said, the Eagles were in 2017 at running back when the board doesn't fall the way they want at a position, and then they're going to go after it. I think I saw a comment from Richard Sherman that he's probably going to sign somewhere after the draft because teams see what their depth chart is after the draft. I don't think the Eagles are going to be making a move of significance before the draft. That being said, if you can get a starting caliber player at $3 million, I think they would jump on it.
All right, Zach, last one from me, and I appreciate you joining us here at Birds 365. We have Lane Johnson on in the first hour. I look at that offensive line, I say to myself, if this team is going to overachieve, if they are, because there's not a lot of high expectations right now, but I look at that offensive line, and granted, there's age and injuries, but if you have Lane Johnson and Brandon Brooks and Jason Kelsey, and then obviously Isaac and whoever wins left tackle, that's a pretty good foundation if they're playing at what they're capable of playing. Could you see the Eagles doing more than expected because of that offensive line?
Sure. I would say offensive and defensive line is that the strengths of this team are on the lines. And if you're of the opinion, like the Joe Banner school of thought, that look at the lines and the teams with the best lines are the teams that are going to win, then certainly the Eagles can be better than people think. Now, there should be a degree of skepticism that they can stay healthy with that group because the track record's not there of them staying healthy, and they're obviously getting older. But if their offensive line and their defensive line stays healthy, regardless of what their skill players look like, regardless of what their back seven looks like, regardless of the way the quarterback plays, I think they're going to at least be a competitive team, because when you can block the quarterback and you can rush the quarterback, you can win games in this league.
We booked them before we knew the Eagles were going to make a couple of moves, so it was kind of fortuitous that we had Zach on. Zach, we may book you again and know full well the Eagles are going to make a signing the day thereafter, but we'll probably get you on again before the draft happens 3 weeks from now. We appreciate you coming on with us today. Thanks much, bud.
Anytime. Glad to do it.
That is Zach Berman, outstanding beat reporter for The Athletic here in town. John McMullen, Jody McDonald coming back. We'll put a bow on the show. One last segment of Birds 365 here on Day 4 edition. Stick around with us.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.